Hello, this is Archie Dunlop with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, June the 27th, 2023. I'm going to talk about July 2023. And I'm going to start by doing forecasts for the 12 signs. The reason I'm going to do that is because I do understand that some people watching this video are only interested in a forecast for their sign and they're not interested in the other stuff I'm going to talk about. I'm going to look at the astrology in July, focus on some of the things I find are important. I might look at a few other charts, for example, July the 4th, America's birthday. What about America's solar return? Does that tell us anything about what's going on in America's astrological life? So I'll be looking at that kind of stuff. But I do understand you might be in a hurry, in which case I will go straight for my forecasts for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for July 2023. Aries, do you have fun or do you work hard? After July the 10th, details matter. But from July the 18th onwards, the pain and responsibility of leadership falls upon you. Taurus, you can feel yourself slowing down. And by July the 23rd, you feel as if you've come to a standstill. But your strength of character and nobility are plain to see. Gemini, the month has a tense, even angry start, but after July the 11th, you find your voice. At the end of the month, you can be successful without having to go further than your own front door. Cancer, for most of the month, you're like the lead boat in a flotilla being buffeted by stormy seas, but you'll get through. From July the 18th onwards, consider how your destiny and your career can be brought together. Leo, in early July, your headstrong approach could be more trouble than it's worth. But by the last week of the month, you're feeling comfortable in your own skin and your creativity can get you noticed. Virgo, early July is a struggle and you may feel that circumstances are conspiring to block your progress. And by July the 20th, partners may be causing trouble. Yet, right at the end of the month, you can turn the tables. Libra, friendship matters, but it does seem that some of your friends are losing their sparkle, and in certain cases, they might also be breaking their promises. But to gain new and good friends, you first have to clear the dead wood. Scorpio, you're capable of causing a lot of damage at particular junctures in the month. So if you want to make a fuss, ask yourself if it's worth it. Around July the 20th, great caution is required. Sagittarius, from July the 10th onwards, you want to put a lot of energy into business and career, but your family might be unappreciative and unhelpful. Somehow you have to get the balance right. Capricorn, until July the 23rd, it's a time of year where traditionally Capricorns are lucky in love, but some people have got a real attitude, though it will become clear that what is really needed is a secure foundation. Aquarius, there is leftover stuff that needs to be dealt with, and towards the end of the month there may be a financial disagreement that needs to be resolved. After July the 23rd, someone pauses on your doorstep. Pisces, you want to enjoy yourself, but if you're sensible, you'll know there are limits, and around July the 20th it may be necessary to be the adult in the room, to bring everyone, including yourself, back to reality. So now I am going to look at the positions of the planets at the very beginning of the month. And so this this chart you're looking at is set for the beginning of July, set for Westminster, London in England, midnight, June the 30th, July the 1st. The reason I'm taking this chart is because, it's a symbolic beginning of the month. Okay, that is set for London, but I don't think the planets are going to be so different if you set it for somewhere else. And so, my theory is that you might be able to look at this chart to get an idea about the whole month. So what's going on in this chart? There is a Sun-Mercury conjunction. There it is, in Cancer. Mercury doesn't really like being so close to the Sun. And I think we may find this month, particularly at the beginning, but it may be very difficult to think straight. Maybe we're going to be too emotional. Mercury in Cancer is not the most verbal place for Mercury, and it can be overwhelmed by its feelings. And conjunct the Sun, there's probably a little bit too much emotion there. We also see that the Moon is making a square to Saturn. Yes, there may be a lot of emotion, but can we actually express this emotion? The Moon is the planet of feelings, but when it squares Saturn, it can be difficult. At the same time, Venus is making a square to Uranus. Now, in terms of relationships, that's quite an exciting square. Things can happen very quickly, very suddenly. People can fall in and out of love extremely quickly. Yet this Venus-Uranus square creates a midpoint with the Aries point. To be more precise, Aries is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, and Aries is also on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. Now, this is happening right at the beginning of the month, having Venus-Jupiter and Jupiter-Uranus on the Aries point. But, it may influence the whole month. And that does suggest something optimistic as far as relationships are concerned. We might think that it's all a bit of a desert, but perhaps out of nowhere we can find the right relationship. So that is certainly something to look for. Now, as far as the progress of the month as it goes forward, the beginning of a month, that Sun-Mercury conjunction is strong. It's going to be very difficult to be objective. And if you look at that chart, you'll see that there are no planets in air signs at the beginning of July. So it's going to be difficult to be logical and be rational, because it's things like emotion and pride and concern about money could come together to just make it really difficult to be intellectually flexible. So that's something you have to be aware of as you move into July. Now, there's also a certain amount of aggravation because this Sun-Mercury conjunction that I talked about is making a semisquare to Mars. So there's plenty of scope for getting annoyed. It really could happen, and or maybe other people are going to get annoyed with us. Now you can see at the beginning of the month that the sun is in Cancer and the moon is in Sagittarius. So we're seeing the beginnings of a full moon. And the full moon is, of course, when the sun and moon are opposition each other. And so on July the 3rd, this is the chart for the full moon. There's the moon in Cancer. Moon in Capricorn. There's the sun in Cancer, and so this is where we see, the first big change in the month. Now, I'm not saying that this full moon is massively dramatic, but it's a time when we're going to see the world for what it really is. And I think with the moon in Capricorn, there may be a certain feeling that we have to consider our own financial interests. We're going to realize that perhaps on a financial level, we're alone. That we can't rely on, we thought we could rely on maybe people. We thought we were going to be fine, but maybe not. And there's a sense of insecurity there, and that happens with moon in Capricorn. So look at how other people are behaving. Suddenly, money is going to become important. People are going to be very focused on their own interests. That's a Cancer thing. Sun in Cancer, moon in Capricorn. When you put that together, people putting their own family and clan first, and not being particularly public spirited. So that's certainly something that needs to be watched out for. Then July the 3rd, July the 4th, of course, it's America's birthday. So how do we deal with America's birthday? Well, of course, if you're in America, it's celebration, Independence Day. That always has its traumas. Whenever there's a public holiday, that's when tensions come to the surface. It becomes difficult for families. I know it's supposed to be a happy time, but it very often isn't. It concentrates tensions. Now, as far as the USA is concerned, there is its horoscope, July the 4th, 1776. So the USA's solar return is when the sun returns to where it was, a place where it was at 4:50 p.m. on July the 4th, 1776, when supposedly the Declaration of Independence was signed. So looking at the solar return, the USA solar return, assuming that time, 10 to 5 p.m., is correct. Now, there is a view that it's not necessarily correct, but assuming it is correct, the solar return doesn't actually happen on July the 4th. It happens on July the 5th. And what we notice in this chart is that Saturn is exactly on the 7th house cusp in the USA's solar return. Now, this chart is not something you're necessarily going to feel straight away. It's more about the year ahead for the United States, and I will be going into detail in a video about this in a few days' time. But the only thing I really wanted to say is that Saturn is on the 7th house cusp in this chart, and that talks about America's enemies, how it perceives itself in the world, how it perceives its enemies. And so I'm thinking there may be a foreign policy setback there with Saturn on the 7th house cusp in this chart. I think that America is its enemies may prevail, or certainly may be in a stronger position over the coming year than America would like. Now, moving ahead in a month and moving away from America, I will be looking at the United States chart and Biden's chart and Biden's solar return chart in a few days' time, but so I'll leave that for the moment. On July the 10th, Mars moves into Virgo, and this is kind of real change, isn't it? I mean, Mars has been in Leo for a long time, and suddenly Mars is in Virgo. And at this point, Mars is actually on the royal star, Regulus. Regulus is around 0 degrees Virgo. So Mars on the royal star. The royal star represents people in positions of leadership, kings, presidents, these kinds of people. And so with Mars on Regulus, I think there may be real questions about what right do presidents and kings and whatever have to rule over us. Maybe this is going to be reflected, as we move into riot season. People are not going to be sympathetic to what their leaders tell them. But on the other hand, leaders may be tempted to behave in a Mars kind of way, i.e. being aggressive to the people who they rule over. On a personal level, Mars moving from Leo to Virgo, I think there's going to be greater humility amongst us ordinary people. We're not going to be such prima donnas, and we're going to want to put our efforts into just more sort of routine stuff, making sure all the details are right, clearing stuff up. Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. Making sure everything is properly organized and putting a huge amount of effort into making sure that things are properly organized. Yet, we see a contradiction here, because on the 11th, Mercury goes into Leo. So Mercury started the month in Cancer. Then by the 11th, it's moving very quickly, and it changes sign and moves into Leo. So yes, most of us were trying to organize our lives, yet with Mercury in Leo, this creates an inflexibility, because Mercury doesn't really work very well in Leo. And so it's a time when many of us are going to start being really set in our ways. I mean, not in an aggressive way. It's not like Mars in Leo, but it's our mind is going to be closed to alternative views. We're going to be fairly sure that we're right. But, it cannot be the case that everyone is right. I mean, that is just not possible. So we need to consider the possibility that we're wrong, and we do need to be flexible. So moving on, and on July the 17th, there's a new moon. Again, I've set it for. I set this new moon is set for Kiev. I mean, it doesn't really matter where it's set. I just want to give you a sort of general idea. There's the new moon. This new moon, like the last new moon, is quite close to Neptune. It's making a square to Neptune. It's not a completely close Neptune, a completely close square, 3 degrees off. But I think at the time of a new moon, July the 17th, there is going to be a sense of confusion. Yeah, the new moon is about new beginnings, but in our attempts to create a new beginning, we may lose touch of what we're trying to achieve. So we kind of need to be open-minded there. But new moons tend to be more fortunate than full moons. So this July the 17th new moon may be a good time to make a start on something. So if there's some project that we wanted to begin, yeah, now might be the time to do it. And then on the 18th, the North Node changes sign. It's been in Taurus for some years, for a couple of years, and the North Node goes backwards, and by and large, I'm using the true node here, and so it kind of goes back and forth, but it's generally going backwards. And so what does that mean? Well, the North Node is where we're supposed to be going to. The South Node is where we're supposed to be, where we're supposed to be coming from. And so when the North Node moves into Aries, that's telling us all something on a collective level. With North Node in Taurus, it's all about creating stability for ourselves. That's what we should have been trying to do. We're trying to give ourselves clear grounding. Maybe, after all the COVID stuff, we were supposed to be grounded. We were supposed to be sort of practical and no nonsense. That was the way forward, as opposed to Scorpio. Scorpio South Node, just having intense thoughts, being obsessed with stuff like death and paranoias about death and all that. That's something we should have been moving away from. But now the North Node is moving into Aries. And so with the North Node in Aries, the challenge for all of us is to take the initiative. We have to decide where we want to go in the world. And it's not enough just to hang around, do nothing, create some stability. No, we've got to actually tell the world what we stand for. And because the North Node is in Aries, we need to act. The South Node is now in Libra, so that that's kind of saying that the line of least resistance is to just compromise, do what people say, just fit in, don't protest. No, what we need to do now is make our opinions clear, and this might, in many cases, have a political dimension. Politicians. We always have to look, be careful of politicians. Politicians are trying to control our lives, especially over the last couple of years with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius at the end of 2020. That's about control. It's about the state wanting to control us. And Pluto's in Capricorn now, but it was in Aquarius. It's going to go back into Aquarius. This is about the state. Pluto in Capricorn, state trying to control us. Pluto in Aquarius, as it will be again in January. That's like the state actively, positively trying to control us, perhaps through technology. And we need to resist. Hence the North Node in Aries. It's not enough to just accept the situation. We are, at least many of us are, under an obligation to make our feelings clear. Now, as we move past this, as we move to July the 20th, July the 20th is probably the most difficult aspect, maybe even the most difficult time in July, because that is when Mars is making an opposition aspect to Saturn. Mars is in Virgo, Saturn is in Pisces, they're in opposition. And as I constantly say in my videos, Mars and Saturn are the death pair. Now, that doesn't mean I'm predicting death, but Mars and Saturn can be about frustration, delay, decay, and there might be events going on around the time of this Mars-Saturn opposition which are quite worrying. Still got a war going on in Ukraine. Violence can happen anywhere, frustration can happen anywhere. And so on a personal level, what do we do if we're feeling frustrated, as many of us will be? Okay, you might say that it's going to be particularly Virgos because Mars is in Virgo, and maybe Pisceans because Saturn's in Pisces, or signs that are ruled by Mars, like Aries, Scorpio, or signs ruled by Saturn, Capricorn, Aquarius. But I think all of us are going to be affected by this to an extent. So if we're feeling frustrated, we have to work out what are we going to do about it in a constructive way. When I have clients and I see Mars-Saturn, I always suggest something like, oh, well, assuming they're physically fit, I might suggest they go into have martial arts, or they might do drumming, something to just get the frustration out, some sort of violent activity, but violent in a non-violent way, like drumming or martial arts or something like that. So just watch out for the 20th around then, because it could be quite frustrating. Then moving to July the 22nd, and we get a 45-degree aspect between Jupiter and Neptune. Jupiter-Neptune semisquare is a softer aspect for me. It's much softer than Mars-Saturn opposition. It's about having fantasies. It's about being optimistic. It may be about religion. So if around July the 22nd you feel that you have a wonderful idea, that's great. But also bear in mind it's Jupiter square Neptune, semi-square Neptune. A wonderful idea may not be grounded in reality. So it really does need to be checked out. Then on the 23rd of July, two things happen. Firstly, Venus goes retrograde. Secondly, the Sun moves into Leo. So it's a big change of energy on the 23rd. We've had Sun moving through Cancer. Cancer's all about often about the home and about emotion, and then suddenly 23rd it moves into Leo. It's suddenly all about us, and that's okay. It's a positive sign, Leo. It's a time for showing the world what we can do, being creative, and expecting a certain amount of praise. And now, as far as Venus going retrograde is concerned, it goes retrograde at around 2836 Leo. So Venus is the planet of love. It's the planet of money. It's the planet of expenditure. It's a planet of beauty. So, for example, while Venus is retrograde, and this is, I think it's retrograde until September, I think, something like that. Don't make any commitments about fashion, beauty, even cosmetic surgery, anything that's costly or is high risk. Don't make any commitments. So if you decide to, I don't know, buy an expensive piece of furniture, to buy wallpaper for your house, while Venus is retrograde, just forget it for the moment, because where Venus is going retrograde, it can actually indicate bad taste, or believing that something looks good, then it goes retrograde and you look at it again, perhaps having spent money buying it, and you realize, oh, it's not quite so good, and then in the end you regret having spent all that money. So decisions about beauty should be put on hold. And worse still, you might decide you want cosmetic surgery. Now that's more dramatic, and you tell the surgeon you want this, and then Venus retrograde, you have another look at yourself and you say, no, that's not what I want to look like. So yeah, avoid cosmetic surgery with Venus going retrograde. On a positive note, as we come towards the end of the month, on I think July the 27th, there is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus. Mercury-Venus conjunctions are really creative. in business, in art. So provided you're not spending money on art, provided you're doing the art yourself, you can create something wonderful, or intellectual activities, or writing, sculpture. It's really good. You can create something really amazing. So don't worry about what other people are thinking. We can be very creative at this time with this Mercury conjunct Venus. Now, final thing I want to say is that at the end of July, Pluto is making a square to the true node. This happened several times. My printout here says there's a square on July the 23rd, there's a square on July the 26th, I think, and on July the 28th. And this is because the true node, as opposed to the mean node, it sort of jumps around. It doesn't go entirely, although it's going backwards, it doesn't go backwards in one straight line. It sort of goes forward a bit, then backwards, and so forth. And that's why you've got these 3 hits in July. So what does Pluto node mean? The node, I'm sure you perhaps heard it, it's about karma and all that kind of stuff. The German schools of astrology, Eberton, the Hamburg school, see the node as being about contacts, the people we contact with. Pluto is about dramatic events, and so it may be at the end of July we could be seeing some kind of world event, maybe with regional, with a regional focus, where a lot of people are in trouble. A lot of people are perhaps moving. It might be some kind of refugee crisis, perhaps, or there might be something happening in some part of the world, and suddenly people's position is suddenly not good. And on a local level, maybe there'll be groups of people who are affected by this, whose life is turned upside down. So I'm afraid I don't see Pluto square the node as being particularly fortunate. I suppose you could see Pluto square node in a karmic sense rather than a contact sense. It may be this is about some collective karma, that all of us, through what we're seeing going on in front of us, realize what we need to do. And that goes back to what I was saying about the North Node in Aries. We need to make our voice heard, and perhaps we will see of the events going on around us, in our community, in our country, around the world, and this will finally convince us that it's just not an option to keep quiet. We really have to be heard, for our own good, but also for the good of our community. Anyway, that is all I'm going to say for today on the subject of July. And I wish you a great July, and I will talk to you again very soon.